Happy Halloween and welcome to another live stream. There's probably a lot of people that are focused on on the witchcraft and other things concerning being Halloween and all. And that stuff is involved out there. I don't think that a lot of people really understand how to break that stuff down. I've talked about that involving you know group harassment, gang stalking, whatever you want to call it. We'll talk about some of the labels. We'll talk about some of the goals of gang stalkers. We're going to talk about a few different things. I don't know how long this live stream is going to be. My throat's been kind of acting up lately, but we're going to do our best to break it down. And, when I started this whole thing, there was no targeted individual community. It was back in, it was in the early 90s. And, a lot of targets will talk about things that happened before that. And I, mentioned that, okay, well, I believe you're a lifelong victim of gang stalking. However, there was probably a time that there was a complete polar shift in your environment that let you know that you were public enemy number one or that you were being harassed or stalked. And that's when the whole thing really kicks off. And that's kind of what I'm referring to, because I could go back into my past and I could pick out several things that were horrifically gang stalking. If you want to call it that, you can call it a lot of different things. I've talked about the different labels concerning this, and some of the terminology, the time frame of that whole thing. We're going to get into that. Community harassment, group harassment, organized harassment, gang stalking, menticide, spiritual vampirism. But when I first started this whole thing, there was no community, and there was really, I didn't even know about directed energy weapons or technology or any of those things. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And one of the reasons why I make these videos, because there are people out there who are just, getting tortured and harassed and psychologically manipulated to the point where they don't even know what's real anymore. And that's one of the things that you go into the goals, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Because everybody's like, what the hell is this about? Why are these people doing this stuff? What are they trying to figure out? It depends. And we'll discuss that too. But when this whole thing started, that was really probably the most prominent thing within my landscape, was the obvious collusion of individuals that seemed to axiom. And then it was axiomated, or it was revolving around the axiom of spiritual things. Okay, it was witchcraft. It was the voodoo. It was all kinds of other things, even aliens. Because a lot of targets will deal with sleep paralysis or poltergeist activity or whatever, or they will deal with the similar things that people would talk about in abductions, but people break into your house. And I talked to another target about that, and his theory is that all those things are just literally there to kind of mask the gang stalking, that the government or whoever is doing it wants you to believe aliens came in there so they can just get away with it, which is pretty plausible. I don't believe there's aliens. It depends on what you want to call them. When you get into the spiritual dimension, hypothetically, you guys probably have looked into Gary Wayne or other individuals who talk about these things and the secret societies, and the mythos or the speculative theories around this whole thing is that some of those beings, the Greys or whatever, people classically refer to these individuals with large eyes, and they're tall or pale in appearance, and they may have a type of sleep paralysis experience. and these things are there, and there's nothing they can do, and they're telepathically communicating with the individual, and they may have different memories that come out during regression therapy or whatever that are very similar to a lot of the other individuals who believe they've been taken aboard spaceships or other things, experimentation. And according to the mythos, the whole idea is, it kind of goes back to the Genesis 6 account, where you have a change. And if you're not aware of what that is, that was the mingling of spiritual beings with humans. Okay. And that was right before the flood. And then, of course, after the flood, you had the Tower of Babel, which was basically forbidden. And that's around the time that God had disinherited the nations and turned them over to the principalities and so on and so forth, which later was kind of a disaster, according to some scholars, including Michael Heiser. And then you have the fulfillment of Psalm 82 when Christ showed up. But the point is this, is that, those individuals had planned on living for quite a while, and then the lifespan of man changed and so on and so forth. And then you had, these beings were dying off. And then when you get into the adrenochrome or some of the other theories involved in that whole mythos, even the vampire stuff, which I've mentioned, of course, Halloween, that's a classic time to mention that, it goes back into that, where they were literally drinking human blood, supposedly, to retain mental faculties and enhance their life force or extend their life at that time that things changed. And these Greys or these other Oikotarians were nothing more than genetic creations to house the disembodied spirits of these amalgamated ones concerning the individuals that were a mixture of angels and men. And of course, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, they are the unclean spirits. They are the sirens of men, and they will torment people. And then when people are typically referring to spirits that are possessing individuals, and I know targets deal with that kind of thing. I was communicating with an individual earlier who wanted to know how long this stuff lasts. So it just depends on what you're dealing with. It depends on who you are. It depends on what's going on. If it's spiritual, it might last for quite a while. If it's not, if you're just the scapegoat of the community or something like that, it might not. It might, you live rightly or you move or it'll go away. But according to, like I said, some of the speculations involved in that, the Greys were nothing more than a way to create a vessel for those beings to inhabit. Because you do a census, even if you go back 50 years, there's a lot less people on the planet. So go back 2,000 years or go back further, and just imagine, what, 300 million people or whatever, probably less than that. So, the being disembodied, it'd be like a limited amount of vehicles to buy in the world. In the United States, we got around 300 million people or whatever. And we'll say that there's only, 100 million vehicles that you can buy. Right. Well, that's going to make things complicated. People they're going to modify, they're going to kind of work around that whole thing. And supposedly these Greys are nothing more than, a way to get around that and, do these experiments on people where, you got these people that supposedly, when women are ovulating or whatever, they have these abduction experiences and so on and so forth. But, getting back to the point, you have a lot of different things that people will experience. And they'll have break-ins. They'll be dealing with people that seem to have intimate knowledge of even things that they're thinking about. That's really creepy. Or things they're doing in their house or in their private areas. Or maybe they'll just become so paranoid and, freaked out by the whole thing when it starts that they will, take off. And I've heard of that because, like I said, more then when I was dealing with this is the talk of whatever neural monitoring or directed energy weapons or whatever. And so people want to get away from all the cell towers. They want to get away from all the, the technology and so on and so forth. And then of course there's the satellites. And so, that how do you get away from that? But people will typically do that. I've done it. And it wasn't to get away from technology. It was just, I wanted to put a buffer zone between me and these people that were following me around. I mean, they literally, chased me, to the point where I was living in a vehicle at that point. And, you got to figure at night, it's pretty hard to drive with your lights off unless you got, night vision or something. They probably would do that. And so I was just, trying to protect myself. A lot of people do that. But then, for some reason, somehow, some way, they will know. They will get directed conversations. They will deal with individuals who seem to have the scoop on what was going on, in the middle of the woods or wherever they took off to. How do you explain these things? And of course, like I said, in the beginning of this whole thing, for me, there was a lot of people involved in that, the witchcraft, the cults, and the secret societies were a big focal point as well. And it was really creepy to deal with it because you're like, who are these people? What are they doing? And I've mentioned that before, that when targeted individuals try to break this stuff down and they try to figure it out, it's like, what are they just getting together? Are they talking about this stuff? Is it planned? I don't think necessarily it is, but it can be. And I've mentioned before that, with the psychological manipulation that targeted individuals deal with, that the theme-based harassment that you're dealing with is a type of mass gaslighting campaign, and not always, sometimes it's personalized, that after the target is indoctrinated or sensitized or traumatized, you can mingle those together if you like. They're aware of what's going on, and now they are noticing things in their salient landscape they did not notice before. And it's a type of reprogramming through trauma. The sensitization process. You're looking for people that are whistling. You're looking for maybe one-headlighted individuals driving around, or you're looking for people wearing certain symbols or using certain types of sign language or whatever, whatever it is. And, believe it or not, those things are, created that way because it is the ability to attack people en masse without knowing anything. You don't know anything about them. All you have to do is look for somebody who's paranoid, or throw it up on, maybe in a movie, or, hypothetically something like the Mandela effect or whatever, and just mess with people en masse, right? But of course, the individual in that psychological manipulation, they're going to think that it's just for them because they don't know. Their conceptual framework does not involve this reality of gang stalking, group harassment, community harassment, spiritual vampirism, whatever you want to call it. And their reality is flipped upside down. We talked about that in Waking Up and Conceptual Framework. And they know how to process that information. And of course, now they are processing things in a personal way. And so you could literally throw somebody out there on a radio show, or when you get into the control programming, sometimes it's more technologically, aimed at someone specifically, and they could probably do that. It's like that movie, The Game, where they, literally hack the guy's television and everything like that. They could do that, maybe your phone or something, but they don't have to, because after they infiltrate your mind through the traumatic invasion and psychological warfare, they don't have to do anything specifically to you. They just have to get you to be looking for it. And now you're kind of your own worst enemy, and you're going to assume the worst, right? But you're going to assume, after being attacked with directed conversations involving personal information that other people shouldn't know, and all these other things are happening to you. You're dealing with break-ins, you're dealing with sabotage, workplace harassment. You're the scapegoat of your family. All of a sudden, everybody is treating you different. You don't know what to. You don't know, and then you see that, or you're subjected to that, whatever it is, the stimuli, and of course, you're going to assume a lot of different things, and that's the propositional tyranny that comes out of the environmental tyranny of gang stalking and the scientific equation involved in sensitization and reprogramming people to assume and be apprehensive, right? And anticipating the same, right? And you're on that roller coaster. You get involved maybe in a social group, or you get a new job, or you move to another community, and you're hoping for the best, whatever your scenario is. Getting back to the time frame, it depends on what you're dealing with. If you're nothing more than a community scapegoat, you could just live uprightly, and eventually people are going to leave you alone. That's a lie. That person's it's a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout. They're not doing anything wrong. Leave them alone. But if it has nothing to do with that, if it's something else, a spiritual thing, or maybe a government program, or something else, people playing God, or just being sadistic, or using you as a way to enforce the tyranny of a fraternity or a secret society or another, social dynamic to control people with fear, well, that's different. But if you leave your geographical area and it's still happening, well, that's different. Like I said, I got that question earlier from an individual. So, well, how long is this going to go on? It depends on who it is. If you've been targeted in the spiritual dimension, it could last the rest of your life. You don't know. God, He may break that off of you. You don't know. What depends on what happens. Maybe it's the best thing for you. God will decide, and that's very difficult to deal with sometimes. It's like, how can this be good? How can this be something that is going to be productive? Well, God is a genius, obviously, and He can work these things out. And He's not afraid to let things happen because He's very confident in that. And, a lot of people will talk about the test of faith and being tested with gang stalking. It's not everybody's a believer. Some people do not believe in these spiritual concepts, and they are victims of gang stalking. And it might be different. It might not have anything to do with that. Ultimately, it's evil. So there's always a type of spiritual connection. But there are government programs. There are, things going on where people want to silence whistleblowers and all that kind of thing. And so it depends on your scenario. It may stop. It may start. Again, it may involve that little emotional roller coaster that I talked about earlier. Because why? Because now the sensitization has moved into a psychological framework of manipulation to where you're expecting it. And then what? Well, you can be accused now. You're just pessimistic. You always think the worst. You're negative. You're living in fear. But, the blah, 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 blah. It always follows that same pattern. And that's part of the gaslighting, right? Because when you deal with this whole thing, you're dealing with, everything from experimentation, silencing whistleblowers, reprogramming people, tortured, the sadists who just get off on it, enforcing tyranny through social dynamics. And of course, it all leads to gaslighting, internalized psychological manipulation to either disillusionment, dysfunction, character assassination, deprivation to excommunication, indoctrination, or incremental breakdown, manufactured schizophrenia, to menticide, and possibly even suicide. All right. But, the whole goal can involve all those things, but it's not necessarily going to be the same, right? When you get into the vampire thing, it's like they're getting off on it, but at the same time, you have to realize that, even when you get into the spiritual aspect of it, they're the ones kind of being set up for this, at least in my opinion. Like we mentioned witchcraft or, voodoo or all those other things at the beginning of the show. But it's not necessarily what you think it is. Because, and I've mentioned this before, people are people. We don't have spiritual fingers. Individuals can be in communion with entities that are not of the physical dimension, and they can have extra dimensional second sight or information, or they can be manipulated or whatever. But technically, they're just people, right? And so it's, I've mentioned this before too. You never want to go after the puppets. Never focus on the puppets. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people who they become involved in a social circle because of the tyranny of their environment, that they probably shouldn't be involved in. Maybe they're involved in, certain, I don't know, crowds involved in substance abuse or other things. They're kind of living on the fringe of society, and these are the only people that they can really hang out with. And sometimes it's set up that way, or sometimes people will be offered free drugs or whatever. But the thing is that when you get into the framework of that, and what happens to people who are involved in those social circles, it's like bars. There's probably a lot of people who think it's no big deal to go to a bar. I talked to a guy a while ago, and he said, I don't know what you're so paranoid. You're living in fear. I said, if you're a targeted individual, you don't just go to the bar anymore. Okay, that's not you, especially drinking alcohol or something like that. And you can drink alcohol. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would do it in the safety of your own home. And, the thing is, when you hang out with these individuals or you find yourself in the wrong social circle, it just feeds into the problem, because, a lot of targets are chased away from their houses, away from their families, away from their job, and they end up, like I said, on the fringe of society. And then, it's like a chain reaction. Discrediting people is on the list and part of the modus operandi involved in gang stalking. And it's just that much more believable. You got somebody who's paranoid. They're hanging out with individuals who are involved in drugs, and now they're dysfunctional, and everybody's going to assume the worst, right? It's just chain reaction. But when you get into the gaslighting, as I mentioned earlier, they want you to internalize these things. They want people to believe the disinformation about you. And once you get to that place where you're anticipating it, right, like I said before, they can accuse you. You're negative. You're just, you're reading into things. You're assuming the worst, and they have the benefit usually at that point of plausible deniability due to the science around the psychological manipulation framework, because you're looking for it. You've been sensitized to these things, and that's just the way it works. There's a lot of different categories involved in this. First, I'm going to see if everything is fine. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not. And it seems like this whole thing is working. And it looks like there's audio. Nobody's complaining. Nicholas Boserman, we do have a moderator. Welcome to the live stream. And I don't know how to pronounce that. Frederick, welcome. See who else is out here. Holger, welcome to live stream. Pamela Barone, welcome to the live stream. Sade Ellis, welcome to the live stream. Okay. Okay, I'm just looking at all this stuff. Okay, well, you guys are just having these conversations. Nothing seems to be wrong with that. And I was just kind of looking through. Steve the Pigeon, welcome to the live stream. Okay, and Steve the Pigeon says, I don't go looking for it, but I can't go about my day with my eyes closed, and they can't help but to get in my face and can't even take a bath. And so this looks like Steve is getting some intense harassment. And that's, gang stalking is an invasion. It absolutely is. And I'm not accusing anybody of looking into it. My point is that when it comes to mass gaslighting, the framework is created through trauma invasion to where you're going to notice something because you're, literally being reprogrammed without your consent. Right. And I think Nicholas Boserman has mentioned this, and I think other people have mentioned it too, that at first, these people, it's the best example that I can think of. And Nick brought that up. He's like, before I knew that I was being targeted, these people would try to mess with me. And I noticed the same thing. The same thing happened to me. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I didn't think people were stalking me. I didn't, even know. I just thought they were just freaked out. I thought they might have been on something or needed to take a nap or having a bad day. I didn't know. Or the directed conversations just seemed like an amazing coincidence. Wow, that just happened to me the other day. Really? And they're just kind of shaking their head and walking away like, you ain't catching on to this yet. Because they're trying to mess with you. But you're like, you just, I don't know. You just, at that point, you're like an innocent babe or something. You just don't know because you haven't been sensitized enough to be really made aware of what is really going on. And then after that, it's just, you notice every single thing, And so, but it's an invasion into your mind. It's like a reprogramming, right? It's like a mind virus they give you. The problem is that when it gets to that stage, they can back off and use very subtle techniques and have that plausible deniability so they can use accusation gaslighting. And that's a huge psychological manipulation technique because you're overreacting. You're paranoid. You're crazy. You need to go get examined by a psychiatrist or something. You're having delusions, right? You're everything from mental illness to some kind of mood disorder, and it's all you now because the plausible deniability gives them that cushion, right? But it relies upon the framework of sensitization, right? And some of the lower levels of gang stalking can involve, is like I mentioned, the community harassment. That might be localized. You're the social scapegoat in a group of people. And, I've talked about that before, that it's like a glue. People there's just enough tension and frustration in the world to keep people bitter enough they just need somebody to vent on. And if you fit that little, piece of the puzzle, they all come, flocking to you. It's amazing how that social dynamic works. Social scapegoat, family scapegoat, same thing. You're the, you're the odd person out. You're the black sheep. And it just, they all get together. And it's for them, it's like a glue that holds everything together. And they bond over it, man. People bond over talking negative stuff about people. I see it. You see people gossiping in restaurants. You see people gossiping in bars. You see people gossiping at work. And they love it because this, the system of vanity and the level system that you're in this world is like every time somebody falls down to, the rock bottom level, or they go down within the tier of the social structure, you move up a little bit. Right up a little bit, right? At least I'm not that person. Which a lot of this whole thing, when you get into the coercion and some of the stuff in the fraternities and the social dynamics, where they'll be made aware that you've been targeted and threatened. Because if you don't go ahead, open your mouth, go ahead, try to be a whistleblower. Go tell the secrets or whatever it is, and you don't want to conform. Fine. We can be like old Bill over there, rocking back and forth in the psych center, with everybody, looking at him like he's nuts. And nobody knows that we're really doing these things to that person. And everybody else just thinks they're crazy. They're on drugs. They just decide to not be responsible and screw their life up, right? What a shame. What a waste. Well, I guess that's just, survival of the fittest. Sink or swim. Sorry, Bill. You better get your act together, right? But they don't know. They have no idea, and they can threaten people with that. Well, it's very, very powerful. And I've dealt with a lot of people. I've heard a lot of testimonies from individuals that they are threatened. And I was, and they're like, you want to go against us? You don't want to join the little crowd here? We're going to drive you nuts. We're going to drive you to suicide. We're going to do all this. We're going to do that. We're going to do the other thing. We're going to poison you. We're going to kill you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's very frightening for targets. It's very frightening for people who are involved in that. And that's kind of the framework when you get into the secret societies you have. And by the way, I'm not saying that Freemasons or the Illuminati is gang stalking you. Okay. They're probably not. But however, I've mentioned before that when you get into that arena of spiritual manipulation and some of the foundations of those things at the higher levels, that people can be susceptible to that. And I've talked about some of the spiritual things involved in this. That can be a huge part of your scenario too, where they don't have to be talking on their phones. They don't have to, have cameras in your bedroom or your bathroom or whatever. They are literally part of like a demonic collective. They might not even know it. That's the scary part about it. And, I've heard other people talk about that too, where it's like they're dealing with two different people, or they'll go into a specific, maybe a restaurant or a geographical location, and people will just be, heavily stalking them. And then they come back a day or two later, and the people are just, it's like they don't remember any of it. They're, a completely different framework. And maybe they're acting, who knows? Maybe they're not. And some people, they grow up around these people. They're just like, they flip. It's like there's somebody else all of a sudden. And they know things. And you're like, who the hell are you? And then they flip back. And, they're kind of dazed out. And it's like, I don't know. So if you're one of those targets who's dealing with, that environmental tyranny that, seems to be everywhere, you go on the run or you leave or whatever, you could be dealing with that too, but you don't know. It could be, something that is created through that science of gang stalking and some type of government program where, it's like when people talk about the whole city being after them. The whole city knows. It's like the Truman Show. Well, probably not. There's probably a percentage of people, like I said, within the demonic hive, or maybe even involved in a type of a clandestine group of people or something, but it's probably not everybody, but it seems like it. And so there are those things that factor into that. But the framework of it is that you are the victim, and you've been targeted, but you don't know why. And part of the disinformation that comes at targets involves the reason, right? And I've talked about that before, that, people talk about, well, I've been chosen. Well, you might be being persecuted for your faith. It might be a test of fidelity, and God allowed that, but it might not. And to think that people are chosen, right, takes away from the biblical text, because you're justified and you receive the good news or the gospel in the word of God, and you believe it. That's what faith is. And then therefore that's, your salvation is based in that type of foundational framework where you hear it, you believe it, and then you act accordingly. You're not just mysteriously chosen because you're some victim of harassment and now you find out you're some child of God or something. But why is that dangerous? Because it just makes you look crazy. And it feeds into the persecutory delusion criteria that's set up by psychiatry, to where this person thinks they're chosen. Because when somebody, when you talk about this whole thing, like I said, doing this is like the total violation of my protocol. But you talk about it and it sounds nuts, depending on what you're dealing with. Why would all these people be doing it? Why are you so special? Why they give me? I'm chosen. Really? Oh, okay. You're nuts, is what you are. Right? It's over at that point. You have zero credibility, man. Right? And it's and then it's even irritating to some people, and then they might even start doing something to you, and you don't know. But there's other things that that play into it as well. Sometimes people believe the government's after them, and they might not be. Right? Who though? That's the worst part about it. Who's doing it? Is it a foreign power? Is it the United States? Who can you prove any of it? It's talking about all the lawsuits and everything that were out there. It's like, what? How are you going to go into court and prove that to get damages, man? Even if you can prove you've been damaged by a directed energy weapon, who did it? Was it the Russians? Was it the United States? Was it some crazy people from, Timbuktu with a bunch of money? You don't know. You can't prove it. You can't prove it. You can't sue somebody. And that's a problem, because when people are indoctrinated to believe the government is after them, or the Freemasons are after them, or the Illuminati is after them, or whatever, it just feeds into it. It's like the reptilian stuff. You're just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, man. I'm sorry. Maybe there's some medication out there that can help you out, And disinformation is deadly, or they want to drink your blood, right? The adrenochrome thing. I don't know. I mean, I've looked into some of these things, and there is a mythos around it. There is, a type of framework involved in it, but some of it just makes you look nuts. And some of these things are correlated and planned out. And like I said, within the theme-based menagerie of psychological manipulation as a target individual, that disinformation is crucial, right? Because, like I said, the goals are to assassinate your character. Even if they are experimenting on you, if they make you look crazy, they're going to get away with it, because you can scream as loud as you want now. Nobody will believe you, right? There's that homeless crazy person on the street corner over there, and they're saying that the government is after them, or all these people are after them, and nobody's going to believe them, right? Some of the lower levels, as I mentioned, social scapegoat, family scapegoat, the community scapegoat. Higher levels, we just kind of talked about that, the government experiment, the vessel of wrath, the spiritual stuff, the vampire thing. And see, some of these people are feeding on this stuff. There is the test of faith. That can be part of it. And there's also the whole thing of you being kind of an axiom of bait. And I've mentioned that before. When individuals get involved in this stuff, they're going to be judged for it. Okay. It's part of that legal framework. I've mentioned that before, that there are spiritual norms and laws within the created order, right? Do unto others, do to them, do unto you. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. That's a bad one. Don't murder, right? And so on and so forth. All these things fall within the categories of gang stalking, right? Even when you get into some of the oaths and the secret societies, it falls along the framework of idolatry. And so you have a type of infiltration and ownership of spiritual entities, and you also have people being corrupted incrementally to the point where they're going to be hellbound, basically. And coming after you is going to be part of it. That's going to be part of it. Okay? They shouldn't be doing that, man. They shouldn't be doing these things to you. There is no excuse. And that's part of the gaslighting, too. They want you to believe you deserve it. They want you to internalize this whole thing and believe they're either trying to help you, it's justified, or whatever. And that's part of that whole internalized psychological manipulation, because you deserve it, because they have the right to do it. Maybe they're just angels in disguise, right? And if they traumatize the individual long enough, drug them frequently enough, poison them or something, or keep them awake, right? The old cult techniques, well, you might end up falling for it a little bit. This stuff can get pretty intense. And there's a lot of targets out there who are dealing with those things. And it's no laughing matter. And the framework takes people in to disillusionment, pessimism, to the point where you don't even believe that anything is real, or you're questioning it at the very least. Am I in hell? Is this a nightmare? Give me a glass of ice water and pour it over my head to see if I'm actually awake. This isn't possible. This whole thing is just too crazy. And you have those crescendo moments where you'll sit back and you'll go down memory lane, maybe by yourself. Maybe you're awake at night. Maybe you're just, thinking back or having one of those flashbacks because you're triggered by the environmental stimuli. And it just doesn't seem possible, right? Disillusionment. Similar to what I've talked about when you get into the churches with these false teachers and these false doctrines and everything, and then you get the regulating and dysregulating spiritual manipulation where people will be getting high, right? Spiritual stuff going on. And it's not, in my opinion, that stuff is not God. And of course, these people are not working for him, obviously. They've got obvious false doctrine. But as a new believer, you don't know that. And what happens is that you go chasing after that, and it's magical, and then you get dysregulated. And then you start to see the inconsistencies. And then you conflate that whole thing in with that framework, and then you write off Christianity and you throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you deconstruct from Christianity when really you were just waking up to reality. And you should have deconstructed from the false doctrine, and knowing that in Acts, Paul said the wolves are going to come in here and they're not going to spare the flock. After I leave, it's going to be a nightmare, and people will not endure sound doctrine. They're going to introduce destructive heresies and doctrines of demons and everything. But what happens? People just they go into disillusionment. They can't handle it. It can't be real. There's none of this stuff. And then you have all these extreme things. Hell. Wow, that's all I was. And then it's like slipping into a warm bath. They'll provide you with that out because they want you to believe the lie. Because why? Because it's psychological manipulation. They want propositional tyranny, and as long as it contradicts the truth, they win. As long as you believe a lie, they win. Right? You got all these weird things. Somebody 2,000 years ago died on a cross, and they're coming back, and everybody's going to come out of the graves. And I was just crazy. It's just like all the gang stalking. It's all the other things. And they have this extreme religious experience. They're around these extreme people who are probably being manipulated spiritually. And the whole thing just explodes finally, and they run off, and they run as fast as they can. And they don't want to look back because they don't even know what happened. Psychological manipulation to disillusionment, propositional tyranny, reprogramming people. It's everywhere. It's all over the place. I'm going to go back in the comments. Looks like you guys are just talking back and forth. Okay, that's good. Okay. And Nicholas mentioned this. He said he was given free drugs. Yeah, they'll do that. I've heard of that too. It's like somebody wants to quit, maybe, methamphetamines or whatever. And it's like they all know it's creepy. They show up and you're ready to leave town. You're ready to pack it up. You're ready to go to the treatment center, whatever's going on. And it's like they all want to hook you up for free. When before that, when you were jonesing and running around, chewing on your fingernails or whatever, and you're out of money, you're broke, busted, and disgusted, they wouldn't give you nothing. They wouldn't even look your way, man. They wouldn't even give you the courtesy of a wave. And then they all just show up in droves. They give you, you're ready to break free and escape. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they want to come and stop you. They want to keep you from getting out of there. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens to targets, man. and they want to leave. And a lot of people will do that. They'll move to a different city. And I remember when I went to treatment, um, everything, it's like they'll back off, and then they'll just kind of come out of the woodwork all at once. And it was actually on Halloween night, back in 1996, and all of a sudden, like probably at least 10 people from the treatment center that I went to treatment with showed up at my house. And they were, it was directed conversation after direct conversation. And one of the people looked over at me, and this girl actually, pinned me up against the wall. And they, a couple of them just looked at me and they said, it's going to be just like it was in the other place. And it was just, who are these people? It's just creepy that they just stalk you and do all this. Doesn't even seem possible. And, if you try to talk about this stuff, you just look nuts. And I've talked about this before, that my goal is for people to be aware of the psychological manipulation that they are dealing with, not only the sensitization, the science around gang stalking, and the motive of it, and what to do and to ignore those things. Have very strict criteria. Getting to the point is that ignoring these things and kind of tuning them out and following protocols and trying to live your life in spite of this whole thing is really your best weapon. Because what's going to happen is that if they can't get your attention and get you freaking out, they're going to become aggressive, which means that it cancels out the gaslighting and it cancels out the accusation methodology around that. Because they're going to, they're always going to say the same thing. You're just nuts. You're just freaking out. Right? You need to go get your head examined or something like that. They're not going to be able to do that. If you're not reacting, if you're playing stupid, if you're processing information very critically and tuning things out, they're going to have a hell of a time getting your attention. And they're going to be so obvious that they can't gaslight you at that point. You're just basically neutralizing their whole method. And it's very important to do that. Okay, I'm just looking at the comments again. Lord, be a lamp under my feet. Welcome. Bora Bora, welcome to the live stream. Okay. I'm just looking through this here. I remember what I was talking about. When you get into that framework, that you have to be very critical of the processing. Right. So really the takeaway is, it's not so much that you need to ignore everything, because that's not really possible. You need to be aware of what they're doing. And you need to process the information in a way where you are aware of the science. Because I end up jumping to conclusions. All targets do that. And that's really the danger. You don't want to get gaslighted. You don't want them to accuse you. You don't want to overreact. Unfortunately, that means that targets, usually they have to deal with a certain amount of isolation and deprivation, which of course plays into that equation. And that, plays into the whole theme of this type of organized harassment, in that they want to break you down. They want to just basically take you into a place where you're mentally taxed out at the very least, or a type of dysfunction that is nothing more than manufactured environmental tyranny, schizophrenia, right? Because, there's a way to do this stuff. A lot of people would argue that schizophrenia is more of an environmental thing. And this is doctors. It's not just gang stalking victims. That it's created through an environmental subjection of trauma and stimuli, rather than some kind of weird, mysterious brain disease, right? Or chemical imbalance. It's not really, it's and these things are environmental. They want to drive you crazy. And they'll admit it. Okay. I'm just reading through here. Tam Tam, welcome. Okay. And it looks like Tam Tam has been doing this for 22 years. Well, my hat's off to you. I've done it for a long time as well. And there are a lot of targets out there who are veterans of organized harassment, gang stalking, whatever you want to call it, and it's very difficult. And that's I've talked about the time frame before. You get out to 2 years, it just seems crazy because you thought it was going to be over. You didn't think it was going to last that long. You get out to 5 years, and you really start wondering what's going on now. The disillusionment seems more plausible. You get out to 10 years, 15 years. Well, now you're becoming hopeless, or you're starting to kind of succumb to some of these things. And I've mentioned that being accused of playing into people's delusions. Hypothetically, if people were reading into their environment and delusional, the equation is the same. My equation for helping people out, or my protocol is that you have to process information and just try to live your life in a good way, uprightly, and try to ignore these things and be critical of what's really going on, because you can read into it. It would work for everyone. It would work if you were a target. It would work if you weren't. If you were just reading into things and nutty, well, you'd end up figuring it out. If you are a victim of gang stalking, well, it's going to do nothing more than neutralize their method, right? You're going to cancel out what they want. Usually you get somebody in here who accuses me of doing that, and it's just frustrating. Okay, we're talking about some of the sensitization stuff out there I see in the comments. Echo Green, welcome. Looks like you were awakened in the middle of the night with some V2K. Oh, that's unfortunate. A lot of that will happen. And there are a lot of different ways to process that. Some people, they might hear it, like it sounds like it's in the room with them or above them or in their head. Or it might even just seem like their thoughts. It depends on there's a lot of different forms of that kind of thing. And it's really creepy when people have to deal with that, because before they really knew about this type of technology that is proven to be out there, by the way, obviously, sound to ear, V2K, all that stuff and beyond. Anybody who was hearing voices was just absolutely, nuttier than a fruitcake. Now, not so much. Who knows what's going on? And some people talk about you can actually buy this stuff for thousands of dollars. Not that it doesn't take the budget of a government program to do it, right? And so you're up against quite a bit of things as a targeted individual, depending on who you are, and that's definitely hard to deal with. Okay, Jeremy M, welcome to the live stream. Yeah. Jeremy M says, I just keep acting like I didn't hear that and say, huh? What? Could you repeat that? That's a good strategy, man. That's a good one. I used that before. It's like you're in a workplace, somebody tries to do that, huh? You want to talk? Let's talk, in front of the whole room. I'm pretty loud too. I don't have to be. I'm not obnoxious. But if somebody does something like that, I'm not afraid to have a conversation in front of, whatever, however many people are in the room. And they're not usually that bold, especially if they're trying to hint around with things and kind of play a game with you. Then they kind of back off of that. But it's a pretty good strategy, Jeremy. That's good. I think you were the one that does the gray rock, I think, and that's good. You want to do that. A lot of targets. And it's hard not to do this, but you're looking around for this. You're trying to figure out, if somebody's following you or what's going on. Are these people going to be in on it or whatever? And you're looking around, and the problem is you kind of bring that to you in the sense that you're looking at people and they're wondering why you're looking at them. They might not have anything to do with it. They might even know. You're like, what's up with that guy? He's staring at us. And they might be paranoid. You have that anomaletic situation where you have two paranoid targets who are looking at each other, and one person says something and then they think it's a direct conversation, and really both of them are victims, but they freak out because it's just a trigger mechanism. Okay. And Nicholas Boserman says, when you freak out, you might as well just be their puppet. And that's a good point. I think I hit the right one. Did I? I don't. Maybe I didn't. I don't know if I got the right one up there. Sorry if I didn't. Nicholas says another one about the coughing. Yeah, I didn't get the right comment last time. I get coughing and just don't pay attention anymore. And the general public at that time look weird for fake coughing. Oh. And that's another thing too. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like you don't even know what's going on. He's like, "You all right, man? You want me to get you some Chloraseptic or something? You gonna be all right?" And if you weren't sensitized to it, you wouldn't even notice it. You'd think they, I don't know, maybe needed to clear out their, forced air heater or something. But now that all these people are doing whatever they're doing, it's like you notice it. And you can tell the fake cough. You hear somebody cough and they've got, phlegm and you can hear it, but then you see the people are, and it's like, and I'm not saying it happens to me, but I've heard a lot of testimonies and I've heard things. In fact, some of it's not even really directed at people. It's like some people have these psychological quirks. I seen this the other day in a store and I noticed it. It's like this lady was doing that. And I'm like, that's not a real cough. It doesn't sound like, but her little girl was following her around and she was doing it. And so it was like a disease, it's like these, I don't know, some kind of a weird way of just dealing with social anxiety or something. And even when you look at, you might watch a sermon or a presentation or some kind of thing where there's an audience, and just pay attention to it. Right? Because you're not there. Go find something and watch it where you have an audience of people and a speaker up there, and listen to, what's going on with that. And there'll be people out there, I swear, they just want to get on the recorded audio or something. Right? I don't know. Because it's like they're out there in the audience and it's like this, a crowd of maybe 1,000 people, 300-400 people. But it'll give you an idea of what's going on. Is it possible for them to do that to you in something that's been pre-recorded a year or two? No. And so test yourself out. But it's kind of funny to notice that. I've seen a lot of people with these weird, quirky things that they do in public, and it's weird. Even when you get into mob mentality, people act differently in a group. It's like they're role-playing. And we'll move on from that comment. Okay. All righty. Well, guys, we're moving towards the end here. And I just thought I'd come on for Halloween and talk about some of these things we went through. Did the different labels, obviously, community harassment, gang stalking, organized harassment, community harassment, the lower level, social scapegoating, the family scapegoat, the community scapegoat, the higher levels, where you get into the government the experiments, silencing whistleblowers, the vessel of wrath, social coercion, the social dynamics, the spiritual stuff, the vampire stuff, the test of faith, the individuals being used as an axiom of bait involved in the future condemnation of people involved in this, the goals of gang stalking: defeat, experiment, silence, reprogram, torture, the sadism involved in it, the enforcement of tyranny, gaslighting, of course, to get you to internalize these things, the psychological manipulation involved, the disillusionment, the dysfunction, the character assassination, the excommunication, the incremental indoctrination, not only of you, at least they hope, But individuals who believe lies, like these people are just mentally ill, or they are suffering from the sequelae of a drug addiction. You want to avoid these psychological games by realizing the motive. And I've talked about this. They're very needy. Nothing is done without a motive. If you want to profile someone, doesn't matter who it is, what are they doing? Because they're doing it for a reason. And the disinformation around gang stalking is not plausible. Okay, that's your best friend, because the disinformation is going to show itself. If they're trying to help you, they wouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And because God is working it out, it makes it plausible. They're going to try and I don't know, step up on that and play it. Of course, it's illegal. And it goes against the framework of the biblical principles of the Bible, so it's not believable there. They're obviously contradicting themselves, and I've mentioned that too. When targets get attacked, people are angry with them and accusing them of being mentally ill. That's contradictive. If you were sick, if you were crazy or mental, they would not have the justification to be angry with you. Okay, that's dumb. Okay, you can see what they want. They want to manipulate you. They want to psychologically manipulate you. Sorry about that. They want to feed on you, and they want to control you, and they want to reprogram you. That's what they want to do. Right? Sometimes it's a power trip. Sometimes it's a spiritual thing. Sometimes it's experimental. Sometimes it's just sadistic. But it's always going to involve that psychological manipulation. And your job is to process information in a critical way and neutralize these things, like Jeremy was talking about, where you're just going to play dumb, right? You're not going to let them get a reaction. And I think Pamela Barone was talking about that once you react, they own you, right? And it just creates a chain reaction. You don't want to do that, because this is science that's based on chain reaction. And it moves into that, what we talked about, right? Disillusionment, dysfunction. And then, of course, they're going to label you. You're going to be discredited. And who knows what they want to do at that point. And they maybe break you down, get you to kill yourself, or just experiment on you with a bunch of plausible deniability. You don't know. You don't know. But the key is to realize that it is manipulation, and you want to avoid manipulation at all costs, no matter what. Psychological manipulation is something was just going on outside here, and I'm going to have to take a look here. Hold on, guys. It could be some trick-or-treaters, and they've got their lights off over there, which, hold on a minute here. I got to turn my lights off here. Something's going on out there. I don't think I was talking that loud. Huh, okay. Somebody's running around out there. Anyway, you want to avoid manipulation at all costs, because you don't want to be manipulated, right? That's not something you want to do. When people are manipulating you, they're victimizing you, period. You do not want to deal with things that are not legitimate. And this world, unfortunately, in these last days, is full of things that are not legitimate, involving psychological manipulation and spiritual wickedness. And a lot of targets are dealing with those things. I'm just checking out the back window here. I don't know what that was. Somebody was out there. I could always look back on the security camera. Anyway, interesting stuff. Like I said, there's probably just trick-or-treaters running around out there is all it is. There's kids that live around here. Anyway, it was nice to come on and hang out with you guys. I appreciate everybody, and I appreciate our moderators. I'd like to thank all the people who support the channel. The link is in the description. God bless. Be good to yourselves. Be safe.